It's all good. Okay. All right. All right. Wonderful. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody this evening. My name is Debbie O'Reilly, and I'm the president of Women Organizing Women Democrats. And I'm very proud to have two special guests tonight who will give you some information about voter protection and poll watching. There's been so much controversy and uncertainty surrounding both of these issues. And this is all part of the strategy of the Republicans to keep people away from the polls, because if people are confused and don't know what to do, if they signed up for a mail-in ballot, but yet they changed their mind, what happens? There's so many unanswered questions. And obviously from the first presidential debate, if that's what you want to call it, our current incumbent tried to create more confusion and intimidation around poll watching. So that's why we're having this event tonight, to clear up any uncertainties and make sure that you as educated voters know how to vote and also spread the word to others. So now I'd like to go ahead and introduce Sheena King. She is one of the legislative committee co-chairs for WOW Dems, and we're very proud to have her on board. And she's also one of our experts in WOW Dems. So Sheena, I'd like to hand it off to you to introduce our two guests for this evening.
Thanks, Debbie. Yes, so welcome everyone. We are very excited and thrilled to have our guest speakers tonight. So first I'd like to introduce Tom Adair. He is a graduate of Dartmouth College and the University of Texas School of Law. He's a lawyer with a focus on business disputes. He's a former congressional aide, for several years, and had a small hand in the reforms made as part of the Aviation and Transportation Safety Act, which was passed after the 9/11 attacks. He's a CCDP volunteer for several years, and he's also a former candidate for House District 67. And Tom is currently our CCDP Voter Protection Chair. So we are excited to have Tom with us. And also with us tonight is Brandon Maxey. Brandon is, there you go, Brandon. Brandon is a graduate of the University of Arkansas School of Law and UT Dallas alum. He is a lawyer also at Mayor LLP. He has experience in voter protection since 2012 in multiple states. Most recently, he served as a representative for Mayor Pete campaign during the New Hampshire primaries with coordinated voter protection effort. And he is currently on the CCDP Voter Protection Committee and president of the DFW chapter of the Texas Democratic Lawyers Association. So for tonight's event, we definitely want to hear from you. We want to hear your questions. We want to leverage our speakers. And so we're going to ask you to drop any questions into the chat feature on Zoom, and we will make sure that our speakers get to it. So with that, I'm going to turn it over for a presentation from both Tom and Brandon.
Thank you for that introduction, Sheena. Really appreciate it. And you too, Debbie. It's great to be back with y'all and to have this opportunity to answer questions and address concerns, because there is so much uncertainty and concern about voting and confusion about mail-in ballots in particular. I am going to try and share my screen. Hopefully I get this right. And we'll do, there we go, presentation. As Sheena mentioned, I am the chairman for the Collin County Democratic Party, the Voter Protection Committee. We have a wide range of responsibilities actually, and we've been hard at work for the last several months preparing for this election, with early voting starts on Tuesday, as you guys know, so less than a week till the votes here in Texas will be cast. The goal for our committee is, to ensure that every eligible Collin County voter can cast a vote that counts. It's just that simple. I think we all know why this is so important. We've got a president who is casting doubt on the integrity of our elections and is just creating chaos. Probably should change the graphic here and maybe add the despicable things he said last week about the Proud Boys standing down and standing by. I can tell you that since that debate, we've been inundated with calls and concerns about voter security and voter intimidation efforts We were already in touch with some of the law enforcement agencies in Collin County, but that's ramped up, and we've been liaisoning with them about those concerns. And I know a lot of people have taken it upon themselves to even reach out to law enforcement. But one of the things that's key about protecting the vote is that so many Texans just don't vote. And some of that is because they think their vote doesn't count or they're afraid to. Beto reminded us all in his race last cycle that Texas isn't necessarily a red state, or historically it hasn't necessarily been a red state, but a non-voting state. And we need to ensure that everyone feels comfortable and safe going to the polls. And we know what's on the line this election. And that includes not just at the presidential level, but of course, flipping the Texas House, which is critical and would be an incredible change here in this state. And it's just awesome to see Texas now, in the listed as a battleground state. And I think we've all seen that, not just from the enthusiasm, but commercials. It's nice to see Biden commercials on TV. And as I said, in order for people to feel safe and to get out and vote, we need to make sure that we do our part to protect that vote. Our committee has really 5 areas of responsibility. The first one is election staffing. We work with the Collin County Elections Department to ensure that we have Democrats working the polls. The second is the ballot board. Third is voter accessibility and locations to make sure that they're geographically and socioeconomically diverse locations. Voter protection is really the poll watching program, and then making sure everyone has the information they need. So that's that voter education aspect. We've been working for months with the elections department to make sure that there are Democrats working the polls. We've provided a list of over 200 Democrats who were willing to serve as election judges. And the way the law works, most of the polling places are staffed by Republican judges, but we have a Democratic alternate judge who is the backup and the alternate. And those two people are in charge of each polling place and work hand in hand to ensure that the election at their polling location goes off without a hitch. We're also entitled to have 50% of the poll workers are Democrats. We've provided a list and keep updating it to the elections department of over 700. I think actually it's over 800 now. People who are Democrats who wanted to work at the polls, which is just awesome. It's unprecedented, and it actually, the enthusiasm from Democrats, maybe not surprisingly, totally overwhelmed any interest from the Republicans. Our elections administrator said he was just blown away by it. The one little negative to that was that not everyone could be hired. So there are some disappointed Democrats who aren't going to be working the polls. But the good news is we've had such great interest, and those positions are being filled now. Most of them have been filled, but there's still some sites that haven't been completely staffed. The ballot board and the central clerk account, just real quickly, they provide auditing functions. The ballot board is the group that reviews the mail-in ballots. They compare signatures. We're going to talk briefly in a minute about the mail-in voting and some of the key things, but your signature has to match on the mail-in ballot, has to match the signature on the application, and the ballot board members do that. There's one Republican and one Democrat that sit at desks generally and review and confirm that they match. The Republican judge who's in charge of the ballot board has a good attitude and basically says that they look for every reason to accept every ballot. Collin County historically has an incredibly low reject rate, so they do everything they can to make sure that all the mail-in ballots that are submitted count, and that even minor discrepancies in the signature don't disqualify a ballot. But that is one of the reasons that it is important for people to make sure their signature on their mail-in ballot application matches the signature that they put on their mail-in ballot envelope. Central Count also does a similar auditing function. They go through the provisional ballots. So starting on election day and then the days afterwards, they go through and determine whether or not the provisional ballots should be counted. I mentioned voter accessibility. This really is location. So I talk about geographic diversity. And, for example, we were able to successfully lobby for the addition of Shiloh Missionary Baptist Church to be added as a full-time early voting location. It's always been a great election day voting location. And that's adjacent to the historic Douglas community, the African-American community in Plano. So that's one example of some of the work we've done to make sure that we've got geographic diversity and socioeconomic diversity in terms of voting location. Certainly work with elections to make sure that the polls are accessible to persons with disabilities. The fourth area is voter protection, and that's the poll watching program. I'm going to turn it over to Brandon right now, and hopefully I can still run the slideshow properly and let him talk about our poll watching program, which we are ramping up and getting ready to deploy, I guess, starting next week on Tuesday.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. And thanks for everybody for having us on tonight. I'll be very quick because I know we want to take questions. But right now, one of the most important things that we can do through early voting, and especially on election day, is to have what we call poll watchers. These are volunteers who will be working with us, Collin County Democrats, and the Texas Democratic Party to essentially be an advocate for voters within the polling locations during their shift. So, the main goal is to be the eyes and ears of the Democratic Party within each of these polling locations, and it can make for a long day, but it's extremely vital to making sure that every eligible voter that shows up to a polling location is able to cast a ballot and have their ballot counted. And basically, what this will entail is on either during the early voting period or on election day, you'll get an assignment to a particular polling location, where you'll develop a relationship with the election staff. You can't talk with the voters, but you get to oversee the election staff engaging with those voters and making sure that they're following the rules. So if there is a voter that's being turned away for some voter ID issue, for example, you can engage with that staffer to make sure that, hey, have you checked this or this? Have you followed this procedure, that procedure, stuff of that nature? And then also an equally important aspect of that is to also make sure that there are no barriers to voting that might become problematic later on. So let's say you're there at a polling location at 10 or so in the morning, which wouldn't necessarily be the high traffic time, but you're kind of seeing the line move slow for one reason or another. At that point, you can engage with the election staff or communicate it on up to the boiler room that we'll have, the virtual boiler room that we'll have going on election day, or the Texas Democratic Party, so that we can then engage with the election staff to ensure that they're fixing issues so that the line doesn't get too long. Or it might be an issue where we need to engage with the county folks to convince them to reallocate resources from one location that's not seeing hardly any traffic to these locations that you're at that are seeing high traffic volume during the day. Because as you might know, one barrier to voting is along the line. Voters, just like everybody else, they have lives, they have jobs, and nobody should be forced to stand in line really for more than 30 minutes at a time. And we want to do everything that we possibly can while voting is ongoing to make sure that that doesn't happen here in Collin County. And so, as a poll watcher, we're working with the state party on this. They have a great online, on-demand training program that you'll go through, and it'll teach you pretty much everything you want to know about being a poll watcher. And it'll be a nice deep dive into Texas election law as well. So we have a number of ways that you can sign up if you're interested. Collin County Democrats have a questionnaire on their website that you can fill out. I think the link is on there. You can also just email me at brandon.maxey32@gmail.com. I think both Tom and my cell phone number, I think, is on here at some point as well. Always feel free to reach out and text us or call us at any time. Be happy to plug you into that process.
Thanks, Brandon.
Thanks, Tom.
So everyone knows, similar to the enthusiasm that we've had for working as a poll worker from Democrats, we do have a lot of enthusiasm from Democrats to serve as poll watchers. We have over 120, I believe, folks who have signed up and said they're willing to be a poll watcher. And just yesterday, we sent out the sign up for shifts, and over 66 people have now signed up for shifts just in that first 24, 30-hour window. So some great enthusiasm, but we can always use more. We have a lot more election sites in the county this cycle, which is fantastic. In 2018 and 2016, we had 73 election day locations. This cycle, we're going to have 102 election day voting centers. We in both 16 and 18, we had 33 early voting centers. This cycle, we're going to have 43. So, there are more sites to cover, but it's also great that voters are going to have those more options. And one thing about, Brandon talked about the long lines that we sometimes see. The elections department does have on their website, they track kind of what the lines look like. And so voters can go to the elections department website. You can just Google Collin County Elections Department. I probably should have put it in the slideshow, but and check the website there under voter information, I believe, to see if it's saying that there are long lines at some of those locations. The final area of our responsibility is something that really this whole presentation is about. It's voter education. This year there is such incredible interest in voting by mail, given the pandemic. I get it. So that's something we've been answering questions about that for months now. And then this week in particular, a lot of folks who have applied to vote by mail haven't received their ballot. Usually it's been received by this point. Under federal law, the elections department is required to send overseas mail-in ballots out 45 days before the election. So that was September 19th. Historically, that's when the elections department gets all of the mail-in ballots out, but there's just been so much interest that the volume is much higher this cycle, one. And then we saw some of that litigation, in particular, the court case that the Texas Supreme Court ruled that the elections department in the state needed to put the Green Party candidates back on the ballot. That slowed down the process. So they are not as far along at this point in getting the mail-in ballots out as they usually are, and they would like to be. But the good news is here in Collin County, they've now gotten 2/3 of the mail-in ballots out to those who have applied, and they expect to have that all out by the end of the day, Friday, maybe into Saturday. So folks are starting to receive theirs. And I think the phone lines at our party office are starting to slow down, but we've been inundated with calls saying, where's my ballot? So that's something important for folks to know. And so on that note, we'll address some of these, the vote by mail nuances. I think folks kind of know about the qualifications for whether they can and can't vote by mail, but lack of immunity to or fear of the virus, as the Texas Supreme Court said, alone is not grounds for voting by mail. But certainly, folks with underlying conditions that make them vulnerable get to make that decision on their own, whether or not someone wants to vote by mail and check that disability box. It is up to the voter, with an understanding of the law, to make that decision and to vote by mail. The elections department doesn't question voters in terms of whether or not they truly are disabled when they apply to vote by mail. Couple little things. First class stamp is only one should be required. Only put one ballot in the return envelope. That's important. If like a husband and wife put theirs in the same envelope, at least one of them is not going to count. And the third thing that's also real important to keep in mind is that the return envelope has to be signed by the voter. And as I mentioned, the signatures have to match with the voter application. In Collin County, that means you need to seal your ballot first, seal the envelope first, and then sign. The way the line is for the signature, if people sign first and then seal it, they will cover up about half of their signature, which makes it a lot harder for the ballot board to verify that the signatures match. If people are planning to vote by mail and haven't applied, I cannot emphasize enough the urgency and to do it now. I think we've all seen that the mail is running a bit slower. And so if they're going to apply, folks need to do it. Don't wait a single day longer. The deadline is October 23rd, but I would advise anyone and everyone not to pay attention to that deadline. And when I say it's a deadline, that's the deadline by which the elections department has to receive the vote by mail application. But given concerns about the mail, I cannot emphasize enough again that people applying now, do it now if they're going to vote by mail. And along those same lines, return the ballot immediately after you get it in the mail, fill it out and return it promptly to make sure your vote is received and able to be counted. We've touched on the fact that mail-in ballots are going out this week, the last third or so. We've answered a lot of these questions. We're getting a ton of questions from folks to the party along the lines of these frequently asked questions. If people want to vote in person and have applied to vote by mail, they can still do that, but take your mail-in ballot with you to the polls and surrender it there. And once you surrender it, they will allow you to vote in person. If you don't take your mail-in ballot with you in person, you'll have to vote a provisional ballot, which means that at the end of the election, so on election day or the days afterwards, they're going to go through the provisional ballots and they're going to say, oh, look, John Smith did not return his mail-in ballot, so we can count, for example, his provisional ballot. Certainly don't want anyone voting twice. Similarly, if folks want to drop off their mail-in ballot, they can do that, but there is only one location they can do that, and that is at the elections office in McKinney. During business hours, folks can go in, turn in their ballot, their mail-in ballot there. You will have to go inside. You will have to show your ID. So just be prepared for that. And only you can turn in your ballot. And as a side note, Collin County was not affected by the governor's order last week that limited the number of drop-off locations. That order only affected 2 counties, Harris County and Travis County, which had been planning to have multiple mail-in ballot drop-off locations. One other thing, people can return mail-in ballots by UPS or FedEx, but the way I would look at it is treat the FedEx envelope, the UPS envelope like a mailbox. Make sure your ballot and envelope is all prepared as if you were going to put it in the mailbox. You don't have to have a stamp on it. But other than that, treat that envelope just like you would a mailbox in terms of mailing it back. So that does mean multiple ballots can be returned in the same FedEx or UPS envelope. A lot of concern after the debate last week about voter intimidation. It is a crime to intimidate voters, but it's a little bit of a gray line in terms of what's intimidation versus somebody who's exercising their First and Second Amendment rights at the polls. But we've been in touch with law enforcement. I was talking with several law enforcement leaders in the county today. It sounds like even the FBI is just monitoring things. They will not be on the ground at all, just to clarify that. But they are monitoring social media and keeping an eye out for any hate groups. I'm not aware of any. These law enforcement agencies have not expressed any concern about about knowing of any organized threat by people to try and intimidate voters. And the law enforcement officers I've spoken with, the leaders, the chiefs and sheriff, they're paying attention to this, and they will have no tolerance for improper conduct. If any voter does have a true safety concern at the polls, they should call 911. You know, a lot of the voting locations, especially in Plano in particular, are at schools. And then also at Davis Library, the voting is there's a police substation there. So there are police officers at the schools, there's the public resource officers, and then obviously Davis Library, but there are police nearby if there are incidents, but they will not be standing outside, you know, watching the polls or anything like that. And we don't want that. Certainly law enforcement presence in the past historically can be intimidating, especially for certain constituencies. But despite some of the worries, I think we all know it is absolutely critical that we all get out and exercise our right and make sure that we bring sanity and good government back to this country and to Texas. At one note, election judges in those polling places do have a tremendous amount of power. You know, they are the equivalent during the election of a district court. So, but they do work with law enforcement if there ever is an incident. But again, we've been lucky in Collin County not to have any real problems like that historically, and we expect it to stay that way. Voter Protection Hotline. This is the Texas Democratic Party's hotline. As Brandon said, we're working hand in hand with them on voter protection issues. They've really ramped up a tremendous operation this election cycle. So they can call voters with real voter protection problems can call this number. They will be working with us to address those concerns locally. I think we all know some of the key dates, but early voting starts, as I said, next Tuesday. And with that, I certainly want to open it up to questions.
Thanks, Tom and Brandon. We do have a few questions that have already popped into our chat. So we'll get started on those. Let's see. So starting at the top of the questions. There was a question regarding the process. So is the process that you guys described, is that similar in the surrounding counties?
And I guess I'm not entirely sure what what's being referred to there in the question with regards to process. It's going to be very similar in other counties as it is here. You know, I think we're fortunate to have a very strong county party here, and also just a well-run county and good law enforcement agencies. So I feel like we've been blessed in that regard, and I think everything is, you know, the machinery is working smoothly right now. And I can't say that about all the other counties. I mean, the one difference is the envelopes for mail-in balloting do differ between counties a little bit, but generally speaking, the processes of voting is the same. There are still some counties that don't have voting centers like we do. So in Collin County, you can go vote anywhere in the county, no matter where you live. If you're a Collin County resident, you can vote anywhere in the county. That's not the case in all counties right now.
Got it. Thank you.
Good to know, Tom. We have a question from Bob Pusinato. Is it possible to split a poll worker day with another worker, or are you committed to the entire day?
So if they're poll workers and they're being paid by the elections department, that is up to the elections judge who's running and staffing that polling center. If it's a poll watcher, absolutely. Obviously, poll watchers are volunteers. We'll take them for as long as we can. Right now, the shifts that we're working with the Texas Democratic Party on are usually a half-day shifts, but you know, folks have to leave a little, you know, can't work a full shift, that's fine too.
Okay, Sheena?
Yep, so I'm looking for another question in the, yep, okay, perfect. All right, so lots of questions coming in now. So there's a question regarding someone who, let's see, Joni, she moved and she submitted her voter registration by mail at the same time. On the next election day, he was able to vote, but I wasn't. Her husband, I'm assuming. They said he was registered, but I wasn't. They instead gave me a voter registration form. A few days later, we received his voter registration card, my voter registration card, and a replacement voter registration card for me. Is there anything I could have done differently in that situation?
Based on what I just heard in that situation, I don't think so. It sounds like she did everything right. And if she got the voter registration card, that would be good. I would recommend just calling the elections department and just clarifying. Well, actually, what you can call the elections department to clarify any issues like this. Their phone number, I guess I've got it memorized now, is 972-547-1900. And the other way to do that is to go on the Collin County elections website and check to make sure that they're registered. You need your name and then the birth date is all that's needed. And the one concern I have when I say I recommend people call the elections department is we're getting reports of some of the election workers not giving accurate information. So to add to the confusion, we've got, we do have people at the elections office giving inaccurate information. If something doesn't seem right, please reach out to us. I can be reached at Adair@collindemocrats.org by email. We had my phone number was up there a moment ago. But certainly reach out to the party. Elections@collindemocrats.org is another email that we check, and those can get routed. So if something seems wrong when you call the election department, maybe call back a second time, or you can check with us too.
And then Tom, I would add to that as well. Like if you show up to the polls to cast a ballot and they're just turning you away, generally you have the right to cast a provisional ballot as well. Now that might not be counted unless you show up, a couple of days later, Tom, to cure whatever defect they think. So if you forget your driver's license, but you're definitely registered to vote, you ought to be able to cast a provisional ballot as long as you go back to the main elections office, same place where you would drop off a mail-in ballot, and present your driver's license, and then it will be counted. Or, if for whatever reason you just don't get a chance to cast a ballot, they're just going to turn you away. My advice would be to step outside and call the 1-844 Texas Votes hotline, and then you'll more than likely have a Texas attorney or somebody that knows Texas election law. They can kind of walk you through what the problem is, and maybe you can go back in and fix the problem there. Or if nothing else, it can be escalated from there on, and you can get in touch with somebody to make sure you get. We try everything we possibly can to get your vote counted.
Yeah, I appreciate that point, Brandon. One of the things that is one of the more common issues that we'll deal with during the elections are folks who are turned away because of registration problems. I spoke with our elections administrator, Bruce Sherbert, about that today, and have his lead person regarding registration issues so I can call him directly to make sure that, hey, to iron out issues. One of the typical examples is DPS doesn't always get some of the registration stuff through to the elections department on time. So there are sometimes people who have registered through DPS or other state agencies, and the elections department doesn't know about that. So when voters show up at the polls, they're told, you're not registered. And the voter's like, no, I swear I did it. Sometimes we have to get on the phone and speak with the elections department. And in those cases, they can do some digging and find out, oh yeah, that person did register. And as Brandon mentioned, you should always be allowed to vote a provisional if you think you're registered and they want to turn you away. I believe the only curing that can be done is like if you forget your voter ID. That's the typical example where you go up to the elections department, you cast your provisional ballot, go to the elections department, show them your ID a few days later, and then they will then count your provisional ballot. I know there's so many questions, and since I'm not paying attention to the chat as much, I do want Sheena to read them off. But one thing that I did see is poll watchers do have to be appointed by the county chair or a candidate. So, we're working with the chairman, Mike Rollins, to make sure that all poll watchers have the necessary paperwork when they go to the polls.
Yeah, so along those same lines, the next question was about they have to show some type of identification, right, to the judge or the election officials that are at that site to confirm that they are actual poll watchers. Is that accurate?
Well, as long as I don't think I've ever known of a judge to say, "Oh, prove that you're the person in this appointment." But I guess they could do that. But as long as you have that form, which is published by the Secretary of State, but we'll have that in the party. Our chairman will sign those appointing the poll watchers, so that as long as they have that paper appointing them, the poll watchers will be allowed in the polls to do their work. Poll watchers, though, once they are there, they can't leave the polls. So that's why having shifts does help. So they can't leave and then come back during the same day.
So basically, somebody can't just show up to the polls and say, "I'm a poll watcher. I'm going to make sure that people are voting correctly." Like, they have to be trained. There's a procedure, because I think sometimes people like Trump are giving this impression like, "Hey, just y'all come to the polls and watch and watch what's going on." It's really an intimidation tactic. It's not a poll watching at all.
Thank you, Debbie. You're right. There are only 2 poll watchers per party are allowed in a voting center at a time. And there will be training through the TDP. I think Brandon mentioned that. It's online and on demand for training. I think it's a 90-minute program. And for any lawyers who are watching, you get an hour of CLE credit for doing that.
That's awesome. So there's a couple questions here about, I guess, the attire, right, including mask. So can you speak to wearing of mask and if that is required for voters? And then also there's a question about partisan clothing and attire that can be worn or not worn when people are voting.
Sure. So masks are strongly encouraged, but they aren't required. I mean, voting is specifically exempted from the governor's order requiring masks. But the elections department and almost all of the election judges, there are a couple of exceptions amongst the Republicans, will insist on that the staff wears masks, but voters, and they will have masks available for voters who come in without masks, but they can't require folks to do that, to wear a mask. But one of the other things that is worth noting is that voters can be asked to pull the mask down for identification purposes in there. If the judge says, or whoever's checking them in, "Oh, I can't see I can't confirm your identity." And I'm sorry, what was the second half of that question?
It was about the partisan clothing, the attire.
Oh, yeah. So
Yep.
electioneering is, so if you're wearing anything that has a candidate or party name on it, it's considered electioneering, and that's only allowed 100 feet out. There's a line basically 100 feet outside of the doors to the polls. So anything within that 100 feet, that 100-foot marker, or inside of the polls is prohibited. So if somebody goes in there wearing a Biden, apparel, or probably might expect it more from Trumpers, they have to cover it up.
Perfect. And looks like we have just maybe a statement around curbside voting. So we're just encouraging folks just to allow extra time because there may be some additional traffic for curbside voting. And then there's a clarifying question about provisional. So the young lady who had the question regarding her and her husband, that situation. So to clarify, I think what she's asking is she could have insisted on a provisional ballot.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the case. I would demand to vote a provisional ballot. I guess the one little caveat I have is I think if you're going in to vote during the early voting period and they turn you away or something, instead of voting a provisional ballot and you think you can cure it and you can come back another time to cast a full and valid ballot, I might choose that route. But of course that is, it's a lot of work. So if you don't want to do that, you could certainly cast that provisional ballot. And I do agree with the curbside voting about allowing more time. Just going through the process of voting curbside takes more time. Just the machine is different, and they have to bring it out. So I would say if you're doing curbside voting, it probably is going to take 2 to 3 times longer than, if you were to walk in. I mean, obviously depending on lines. And then if there's greater demand, of course, you might have to wait longer too, in terms of, that waiting for a judge.
And that's a little harder on the election workers. Is that accurate? Although obviously for those of us who are immunocompromised, it is the most safe.
Absolutely. And so anyone who can't enter the polls or doesn't feel comfortable entering the polls can vote curbside. So that is not a problem, and we encourage everyone to do that. Someone brings a machine out from the polls, and and this is just more of my observation and experience, that it does take a bit longer, just because they've got to set up the machine. And the machine actually plays 2 roles. There's 2 separate machines inside the polls that this machine does both. And that's sort of a checking in process, checking the rolls, and then switching over and then to cast a ballot. So.
Awesome. No, yeah, thank you for that. And then on the mask thing, James and I were speaking earlier, and he's in Wiley, and was mentioning that unfortunately there was hardly anybody actually wearing a mask. So he had, I think, a couple pointers on that.
No, I appreciate that. I know masks are obviously it's a safety issue for us all, but for some reason, science has become a partisan issue or something, making a political statement. And so it's very frustrating. So I would recommend everyone just be prepared, wear a mask, and then explore, if they're not comfortable going into the polls. I do think there are, I would say, places like Wiley, maybe they're maybe less likely to, there may be a judge and some workers who aren't wearing masks. I think maybe in Plano, there's going to be more of that, more mask wearing. But my experience from both the primary, the runoff, and the special is, generally speaking, it's all but a couple of those polling places, the judges all insist on masks, but the voters, it's a little bit of a random thing, right? Who comes in and says, heck no, I'm not wearing a mask. But
what I wanted to add to you, if I may, was the plan for me and my wife. I'm going to have to shave off my beard for an N95 mask to work, but and it's worth it. I'm attached, but not that. You can get I was able to purchase N95s at my local pharmacy, so that's going to make us feel more comfortable going in voting, having that level of protection, not having to worry about someone wearing or not wearing. I just wanted to let some of those watching as well know that may be a solution, A, if you can afford it, and B, if you have enough time to acquire one. They're starting to become a little more available. So that may be a solution if that is an issue for someone.
And thanks, James. And for everyone, the N95 masks are the ones that the doctors and the nurses wear in the hospitals for, folks that are even treating COVID patients. So those are highly effective. I'm glad to hear they're becoming a little bit more available, including at pharmacies and whatnot, because they've been exceedingly difficult to get a hold of.
Okay, well, we're nearing the end of our presentation this evening, and I've been collecting some of the links in the chat, and we're going to upload this video to YouTube. We're going to post it on our website, on our social media. Tom and Brandon, do you think there's any way that we could get your presentation, like links to it, or share it with us?
Sure, I can probably just email it to you. Is that work?
Yeah.
All right.
Email works. Okay, so we'll consolidate all of the information for everybody, package it up, and present it on social media and our website, as well as a recording of this presentation. I hate to cut it off early, but I think we've all got some business at 8 o'clock that we need to attend to. Get your popcorn ready and watch Mama handle the Ken doll. So anyway, I'm so excited. Anyway, thank you so much to Tom and Brandon this evening. Highly educational and informative, and we will collect all your information if anybody has any questions to reach out to you.
All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
You guys have a great evening.
Thank